So just very quickly, again, this is part of our virtual user group session, hosted by the Elite Engineering Services, part of Elite Aerospace Group. So a little bit about us. I've certainly mentioned this before. We're an aerospace manufacturing company as well as an engineering services company, partnered with PTC. So we offer the various products and services related to those. And just a quick review of our schedule. I did add one more thing. So today we'll be talking, Walt will be presenting on benefits of workflow supported processes. Walt, of course, Walt Brewer works at Paccar and has been using Windchill over there for quite some time. So he has lots of great experience to share with us. Next week, we'll have Dave Martin giving a presentation on topology, generative design, additive manufacturing. He's got quite a lot of experience with Creo, so that'll be an interesting one. And then I know it's a little out of order, but at the end, I added Creo Simulation Live. We'll be doing another session on Creo Simulation Live or CSL, and that one will be on Tuesday, May 12th. So Dave Martin's presentation will be Wednesday, May 13th. CSL will be the day before, May 12th. So without too much further ado, I will happily hand over a presentation to Walt, since I think that's who everyone wants to actually hear from today. So Walt Brewer from Paccar. And again, thank you very much for presenting today, Walt.
Yep, not a problem at all. Let me go ahead and we'll get this shared up.
All right, so I've made you the presenter. So whenever you're ready, you should be able to.
Okay. I assume everyone can see my screen.
Looks good.
Okay. So I'll introduce myself first. So I'm Walt Brewer. I'm a senior business analyst at Paccar currently. I've got probably 6 or 7 years of experience doing workflow development, building processes and managing the Windchill system on the Paccar Kenworth product, which is basically building custom heavy trucks. So we are an OEM. We build semis basically that you see driving down the road, and our niche or our market that we serve is that we do custom trucks. So more or less every truck that goes down the road or comes down the line in production is different. And that has a lot of complexity and a lot of effort to keep that stuff simple and stuff organized. We have obviously a lot of moving pieces. So the first thing I wanted to do is kind of get a feel for how does your company manage process? How do you make sure that the stuff's getting done, that your tasks are complete, that all of the things that are needed to get your product to market are actually completed? Normally I'd ask questions, and we've got a slight audience. I don't know if anyone on the phone wants to share kind of what their experience is.
This is Stuart from Elite. Yeah, I can mention that most of our processes are managed in Windchill at this point, but there are still some processes being done outside of Windchill.
Yeah, so if you haven't done a conversion over to something like Windchill, most companies, what you're going to find is that a lot of their processes are actually managed in email. Oh, I completed my task. Now I email somebody else to go do theirs, and they email somebody else to go do another task, and so on and so forth. Another popular one that I hear all the time is, oh, well, you have to call them and tell them that they need to do the next thing. A lot of companies are still meeting based, where they get together with a big group of people and talk about what needs to happen next in order to get something to production. And we still have some processes that are paper based. So yeah, where was that PO at? Oh, it's on. You think we end up with a lot of challenges in this realm of all of these processes basically are hard to track, hard to know where something's at, hard to know what's been completed, what hasn't, especially when you have multiple processes that have to be done in order to make all of our systems work. So really, what are the benefits of workflow-based process? And just generally speaking, when you look at a workflow-based process, some of the things that you get is you get traceability. So you can actually see where it is in the process, who's got it, who's supposed to be doing what. And it gives you some place that you can actually see that information and get to it. It gets accountability. So how long has it been sitting in somebody's inbox? Or how long did it take to actually get done a certain step that you were waiting on? Or to get the chief engineer to sign off on something? And a lot of that accountability is because you have persistent tasks. You have an actual object in the system that says, hey, look at this. You've got work to do. Here's what it is. Here's what you're supposed to be doing. And even in some cases, having deadlines on it. But in all cases, those persistent tasks, the status of the task is discoverable. You can look at it and see, has it been done? You have the controlled delivery of information, so you can gather up and say, here's the additional pieces that go with it. Right? If you're doing a PO, right? How much is the PO for? What department is it getting charged to? What's the overall tax impact? Is it going to be deprecated over a certain amount of time, or is it just an expense? And you get consistent routing, so you can know that it's going to go from your engineer to your supervisor to his manager to the chief engineer and then to the accounting department, for instance. And it's less training. I mean, one of the big benefits of workflow-based process is that because the process is there, it's going to be followed. You don't have to teach somebody who they're supposed to take something to. It does it by itself. So once they're done with it, they don't have to think about it. It just goes on to the next person. And then, of course, there's the connected data. So reducing the reliance on tribal knowledge of what do I need to know if I'm going to approve this thing? Who's got information on it? Or what project is it for? And have they actually seen that this is going through? Because you can actually see all that information in the persistent tasks and the traceable information on a workflow. And it puts all that information right there where you need it while you're working on approving or reviewing something. But we're here to kind of talk about Windchill a little bit as much as workflows. So what does Windchill bring to the table when we're talking about workflows? And this is just kind of my experience and going through and documenting what I think is important. One of the biggest things that Windchill brings to the table is graphical workflow engine. The fact that you have a flow diagram that shows you where it's supposed to go or how it's going to work that is actually used to execute the code is huge. And the fact that it's graphical means that you don't have to program it yourself. It's as easy as putting together that flow chart. And those workflows can be simple or they can be massive and very complex. The next thing that it brings to the table and it combines with that graphical workflow engine is the advanced user management. Inside of the Windchill workflow engine, they have a configured capability to actually process who's going to do what task, who's it going to get assigned. And that stuff is from very simple to very complex. We'll go into a little more detail in a minute on that. You get user notifications that come with that user management. So it'll email people, tell them what's going on. The workflows also get tied into the document lifecycle. So as you're going through and working on something, if it's in work, as it transitions to pending approval or approved or rejected, you can actually set up a workflow that's going to manage that change and route it to different people as it changes state. For instance, if you're going to obsolete something, you may want it to actually follow a different approval process as it obsoletes. The task management GUI is another piece that comes out of the box with Windchill that's very useful. The fact that you get a single list of tasks that the user is supposed to be doing or is responsible for makes it easier for them to figure out what they're supposed to do. So they can go check on a daily basis, look at their task list and say, oh, I need to review this or approve this and make sure that it's right. And they're not having to think about that. They can focus on more creative work. The integrated data is another piece that comes into the equation, which is really, so things like the naming of the workflow that you see on the page is the name of the document so that you're not having to go hunt for information. It can be presented clearly what's going on. And the last one that I've got in here that I like to mention when I'm talking about workflows is the configurable deadlines. There are a lot of ways to use these, everywhere from just creating reminders that go out to the users, to escalations that'll go to their managers, to even having a task complete itself if it exceeds its deadline. So let's talk a little more about the graphical workflow engine. The graphical workflow engine that Windchill has is something that allows you, as easy as putting together a flow diagram, to create a workflow that will route a task from one person to another, set the states of your objects, and even send notifications to users. For me, there are a lot of benefits that this brings to the table with how simple this is to use. One, it's easy to learn. I can teach somebody how to use this graphical workflow engine to create workflows in a day. It's very intuitive, very straightforward, and doesn't take a lot of effort to actually make use of. It's configured, not programmed. You don't have to be a programmer to do this. All of the different pieces will make it so that you can go in and configure through the interface who's going to do the task, how it's going to get done, what the deadlines are on it, and get that done without having to know how to write code. It creates a consistent process. So as you look at this flow diagram, it basically guarantees that it's going to follow that process through. Who's going to approve it? When do they get their notifications? What's going to happen when it unlocks or locks the objects? All of those pieces that drive this workflow are managed automatically by the workflow, and they do it the same way every time. The workflow engine also promotes some self-reliance. So the fact that you can get in and do this yourself allows you to go in and look and see what's going on. And if you have somebody who is technical or somewhat technical, as a lot of our engineers are, we can actually get them in and have them managing some of their own workflow pieces as they need to. It's also very flexible. So I can take this and have it do everything from a very straightforward task to a task that has programming stuff in it that will make it so that it's asking people information, doing work, validating that they put something in or that the data that's behind the object is right. Or it can go from something where it routes to 2 people and it's done, to it routes to 10 people at the same time, and depending on which of them are required and which aren't, it'll actually complete itself in different ways and handle each task differently. The advanced user management really is a key that I think is undersold when we talk about Windchill's workflows. Inside of Windchill, we're already managing users who get access to documents and access to pieces. But one of the big advantages of the user management piece in the workflows is that you're not locked into one solution. So you can actually mix and match. Some parts of the workflow or some tasks you can set up and use a object based on the object and who promoted it is who's going to actually do the work. On some cases, you can do it based on a context or a folder where it says, I need this particular task done by the person who's managing the project that the object's in. And you can have other tasks within the same workflow that are being done by a team that is corporate based. For instance, who's your head accountant who has to validate all of the costs when you write a PO? Or for that matter, who's the CEO who's going to approve that $5 million order? And all of those things would have to go to the same people all the time for that particular task. You can set up so that inside the same workflow, you have all of those different levels of user management at the same time. The other nice thing, it's all configured again. So there's no programming needed. The system can figure it out. You configure the other pieces in the background and what groups or what roles they're in, and the system will take care of the rest of it for you. As I said, it gives you system to object level control. You're set at the task level. So realistically, each task has a different set of users, roles, capabilities, and people who are involved. And you're integrated with the Windchill system users, which means that you're not having to manage it twice. A lot of systems that I've seen out there, they go, oh, well, you can manage your users and create these other groups inside of our system. Inside of Windchill, you typically have a lot of engineering and other users already set up inside of different roles or groups that give you the capability to do that management. With the user management also comes the user notifications. So with Windchill, you can do automated notifications that are, as a task gets assigned to somebody, it'll automatically send them a notice that they have the task in their email. So if they're not a regular Windchill user, if they're not in looking at that task list on a regular basis, they'll get an email that notifies them they have something to do. And that notification typically will have a link directly back to their task in the system, so that they can very quickly go in, pull up the tasks, see what they're being asked to review, and follow through on the process that's associated with it. The document lifecycle integration. The fact that you're tied in means that your document states can drive your workflows. So as you move from in work to looking to get it approved, it'll go to pending approval, and that will start a workflow that processes it. As it moves through that approval process and that process gets approved or rejected, it'll actually set the state for you for the document itself, either to the approved or rejected state at the end. It ensures that you have consistent handling. So we've had other systems where this was done manually, and we saw a lot of problems where we had people doing the tasks, but even if something was in production, it might still say it was pending approval, or it might be in a rejected state even because somebody had made a mistake in a manual process. Again, the workflows ensure that it's consistently handled the same way. If they approve the task, it gets approved. If they reject the task, it gets rejected. There's no ambiguity about what happened or why it happened. And it's much less effort to maintain. So because it's right there and handling it from the document lifecycle itself, you're not having to track and figure out how to assign it to different pieces. The task management system, really, it's a GUI that gives you the out-of-the-box tasking. It's right there in front of you. It gives the user clear explanation of what the task is, assuming that you've named it appropriately, and that you have the subject on it listed appropriately. And tasks are searchable. So if you're looking for a task that's assigned to somebody who's out of office, you can go find that task and get it reassigned by an administrator back over to someone else who can actually complete the work. The other big thing that comes with a task management GUI is that you have timestamps on your tasks. You know when the task was created and assigned to a person. You know when the task was actually completed. So you can keep track of when things are done, how they're done, or if they're late. Integrated data comes back again to the naming conventions, the amount of data that you present in your tasks, and even some calculated data if you want to do a little bit of programming. You can set it up so that it will actually show you what the calculated values are for something they're approving. This proved particularly useful when we were dealing with tooling authorization approvals for buying tools, because it would add up and all of the numbers and then break it out to which departments own which portion of the tool cost. But it automatically shows the information, so you're not having to figure it out yourself. And there's less hunting for data because you can gather up other bits and include them in your interface. The fact that you can present the information to the users right there in the task or right there in the interface accelerates decisions because they're not having to go hunt for it, which often happens with people who are busy. They'll set it aside and then not get back to it for quite some time. With this, they have no reason to come back to it if the information is actually presented. An underutilized portion here at Paccar is the configurable deadlines. We've made use of this in a couple of places, but it's a really high value piece of the workflow capability. Among those are the fewer lost tasks. So because you have deadlines, the deadlines can throw reminders, throw escalations to another manager, or even autocomplete tasks as they're needed to. An example of an autocomplete is one of the workflows that we've got for approving sharing a document with a supplier. We actually have that set up so that it routes to purchasing to approve whether or not we're sharing with the right supplier. However, if purchasing is busy or isn't paying attention and they don't actually review it and approve it, instead of letting that fester for an extended period of time, we put a deadline on it that basically said, if this thing sits for 2 days after creation or 48 hours, we're going to auto-complete it and send the purchasing agent a notification that it was auto-approved. And that way we're able to keep things moving, even though they may not actually get to approving that particular share. A lot of my experience with workflows says that I've got some issues with getting, I shouldn't say says that I've got some issues with getting stuff done, but I've had some issues with projects taking a long time to get to completion. Kind of my suggestion is to use an agile development for workflows. Really show the configuration piece of it first. Get that part of it done and out of the way. What that means is building the workflow, building the who's going to actually do the work, all of the stuff that you can configure straight out of the interface. Without doing any programming, without doing any time spent doing coding, you can have a configured workflow, if you understand your process, in a couple of days and apply it to a given object. You just have to understand the when, the who's going to do it, and then build the solution. This portion of it is stuff that you can actually have a user do. When you get to the development portion, it's where you're building out a custom interface, adding additional information to the interface, and really getting more into the area that a developer's skill is handy for. when you're doing that portion of it, it's only about 20% of the value of the workflow. Most of the value comes out of the routing and who's approving it and where it's going. My honest recommendation is work with the business and get the business to do the configuration first. And once it's configured, work with IT to develop the interfaces and the additional information needed to be presented. An example where this is a good practice would be the tooling process that we built. So it had a very complex workflow. And the workflow itself could have been done relatively quickly, gotten it in front of the user, gotten them using it, and probably would have identified fairly quickly that they didn't use half of what was developed in terms of the actual workflow process itself. Most of the time that went into that project was developing the interfaces. And if we had done it with a more agile approach, once we had the tasks in front of them, we could have sat down and looked at each individual task and said, what needs to be in the task and how do we want to present the information? And gotten most of it there and then adjusted as we needed to. It's just a much faster way to develop and much faster way to get to a solid solution that provides the business value. Coming back to the benefits, again, realistically, the benefits of a workflow-based process are traceability. The fact that you can see where everything goes, who's got it, where it's at the moment, whether or not you're going to get it done, or who's going to be doing the next task. The accountability piece of how long they've had it, making sure that they're processing things quickly, is also a big benefit of the workflow process. Having clear processes that are followed all of the time. It doesn't mean that you have to be rigid. You can be quite flexible, but the system will document what's being done and who's doing it. And then the persistent tasks. Having tasks that are discoverable, that control the information being delivered, and that have the consistent routings are all important as parts of the workflow benefit. The reduction in user training as the workflow trains the user as it's functioning, and the connected data to show you all of the information you need without having to figure out where to go find it. So that's what I've got for the presentation. Are there any questions?
Well, the benefit of being the host is you get to ask the first questions, which is good because actually, Walt, I have quite a few for you if you don't mind. While I start running through the questions, if anyone else has any, you can put them in the chat session or you can unmute yourself as well. So first off, the configurable deadline, I have to say I'm a fan. I haven't had much experience with that personally. I kind of see it, the pocket veto in a sense is the best analog, except it's a pocket approval. By doing nothing, it gets approved. And I think that's brilliant. You basically are giving everyone a chance to object. And if no one raises their hands and say, I object, then it gets approved. So I think that is a very good philosophy, and I like that a lot. And I was actually just kind of curious, who gets to determine the deadline? Because you kind of said if it's not approved by a certain date, is it X number of days for the process? Or if I'm asking to share a document, I can say I need approval by Friday, for example.
We actually set a maximum timeline. So we sat down with them and sat down with the engineers and said, okay, so you want to be able to approve this in purchasing. What's a reasonable time frame? Because if you're not approving it, if you're off on some business trip or something, what are you going to do? Because we can't just have something sit indefinitely. And when we talked with them, we kind of negotiated with them and said that it's the 2 days is basically what they agreed to. And we said, okay, well, we can wait 2 days on something that we've asked for approval for. And then if it's not approved by them, we're just going to kick it through and tell you that we kicked it through. So they still get the notification. They can still come back and object, and we can reverse the process. But it means that that document then gets shared and the process continues if they don't object. there are other scenarios where auto rejects should be used. Our approval process, for instance, we added that a little while ago, but we had some approval processes where somebody left the company or somebody just wasn't looking. And for whatever reason, they never approved a promotion process. Tasks stayed indefinitely, and 4 years later, it was still in the queue. And in those cases, that's where the auto reject would come in of, okay, if you're not approving it and we don't want it going through on auto approval, we can auto reject it and just get rid of it. And if you want to promote it again, fine, go ahead and promote it. But we're not going to leave it sitting there indefinitely and clogging up.
So actually, that's a good segue to my next question. You talked about reassigning. If you needed to reassign, you could always go to an admin and have them reassign. Is there a process for that? Or if I have a workflow that has, not yet been approved, maybe because someone left the company, they're never going to approve, do I email the admin? Is there a way I can get it changed myself? What does that look like?
So in today's processes, depending on which workflow we're talking about that we have, as we have a few of them, we have different levels of admin. So you have the org admin or sysadmins that are sitting over the top of the system, who are in the engineering systems group, for instance, who can be reached out to. And if you've got something that needs to be reassigned, they can reassign a task in the workflow to somebody else. In some areas where we've got workflows that are actually highly owned by a specific functional group within the business, we actually gave them the ability to do the reassignment themselves to a certain senior group of manufacturing engineers, for instance, on the tooling purchase process, where they can go in and reassign somebody or put somebody new into a role in order to give that person the ability to do the work or to approve it. And that's one of those that comes in very handy when you have people who leave the company or out on vacation and didn't do the work or whatnot. The other piece I didn't really touch on in here because it's more of a system capability in Windchill than a workflow specific piece is delegations. And delegations are something that some of our users have embraced because basically it allows them to say, I've got a task that's supposed to go and be approved by the chief engineer. He's out on vacation and delegated to one of the assistants. Okay, well, when it gets assigned to him, and it'll actually go to the assistant. And when that assistant approves, it actually states in the approval box, this was approved by the assistant for the chief engineer. So there's a couple of mechanisms that handle reassignments depending on what the specific scenario is.
So I know I'm kind of working backward through your proposal. It's kind of how I took my notes. I apologize. Kind of notifications. You mentioned that you get emails. I know, at least in our database, we have it set so you also get tasks if you go to your homepage. I was curious if you know of or utilize any other notifications than emails and tasks.
We actually do use notifications for other things. In some scenarios where something happens to an object that is subscribed to, it will send notifications. We have other notifications that go out that aren't actually tied to a task, where it's just, for instance, when we reject something, the system will actually notify the approvers who had been on that process that that particular object had been rejected. That was going back to an in-work status. We use that primarily because a lot of times a project or a supervisor who approved something has a vested interest in actually getting that thing through into production. And giving him the notification helps him not have a problem understanding what was going on.
So do you guys use Active Directory? Is that how your account is set up?
We are. we are actually set up to Active Directory.
Okay. I have one last question. It's a bit more large scale, we'll say. So I'll see if anyone else has any questions or thoughts before I get into my last question. I don't see anything in the chat session. Okay, so I have some thoughts about this, but I'm curious about your thoughts. So a lot of the processes that you describe, certainly you're showing how you're doing it in Windchill, but would you say that what you're doing is unique to Windchill? Or do you think this is something that you could do in other PLM systems, or maybe you could do, but not as well? Or I'm just curious what your thoughts are of Windchill being the database that you're using. Does that affect the processes?
So there's a couple of things. There's only a few PLM systems out there that are going to connect to data as well as what we're currently using. Most PLMs have workflow capabilities built into them. They can do a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. I find with Windchill is that Windchill has activity case, and it has the probably more important, it has the flexibility, and that shines in its flexibility, because I can get Windchill very quickly to go through create that. Well, like I said, I can use for the same work. With that comes the complexity of I also know 3 users, the system, which is the double-edged sword that comes with a PLM system. Is there is complexity in the back end that you have to understand in order to use some of the functionality. But that said, the fact that it can do all of this stuff and have the documents directly connected, and in things like our tooling authorizations, we're actually interconnecting the tools to the design documents for the parts that they support, and then connecting the tooling authorization to the purchase order for the tool, and the purchase order is then connected to the invoice for the tool. And we built out the data processing so that it actually handles and keeps track of, did we fully pay for the tool? Was the tool abandoned during development? All of those other processes got built into the overall system so that we can keep track of which tools are actually active, which ones aren't. And the system reinforces that. And realistically, that's where Windchill, I think, has the advantage. Is with its flexibility, we were able to do that interconnectivity and have one system that gives a full picture from the design all the way through to the lifespan of the tool.
Thanks, Walt. I think that's a good explanation. I appreciate it. All right, well, I certainly dominated the Q&A session. I'll give everyone another chance if anyone has any other questions. All right, I don't think there are any others. So, Walt, any final thoughts?
Nope. I hope this is useful to some of you. Feel free to reach out through Ryan if you have any questions. He can put you in contact with me. Have a good day.
Well, thank you again for the presentation. I know I personally found it very useful, and I know several other people that, even if they weren't able to attend today, will also appreciate it. So I will post out the recording. I'll send out the information for everyone, and hopefully we will see each other at a future user group event someday soon.
Yep, hopefully soon.
All right, thanks again, and have a nice day, everyone.
Yep, thank you.